Today in Final Fantasy, we finally get the Buster Sword. We get a look at an absurd white mythic knight enchantment and some instant ramen. Let's break it down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Final Fantasy spoilers. So I know it's a weekend, but we actually have 3 mythics to talk about today, including a certain sword that people have been waiting on for a long time, which means we should probably jump right into it. Start talking sweet new Final Fantasy cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can pre-order them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Second, to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk some Final Fantasy. First up today, we finally get the long-awaited Buster Sword. So Buster Sword, it's a mythic, it's 3 to cast, it's 2 to equip. It gives the equipped creature +3/+2, and then it says whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, and then you may cast a spell from your hand with mana value less than or equal to the damage without paying its mana cost. So Buster Sword, the card actually seems really strong, but mostly for Commander. In Standard, the problem isn't the effect on the sword. Like, 3 mana, 2 to equip, that's a relatively fine rate. +3/+2 is nice. Its abilities, if you're getting a hit with it, are really strong. I'm just not sure cards like this can actually work in Standard. I feel like the whole archetype of equipment that don't actually make a body or anything, they don't equip for free, we just haven't seen cards like this work in Standard in a long time, because Standard's gotten so fast and so powerful. Honestly, Buster Sword, it could be the same card, but it could be, if you get in a hit with it, you just win the game. And I would still have the same concerns of it probably being too slow. But if you think about what this card is, it reminds me a bit of Glamdring from the Lord of the Rings set, which did something similar, but only worked with instants and sorceries, was never legal in Standard either. We have Key to the Vault in current Standard, which is like the bad version of Buster Sword. It doesn't buff your creature or anything. And then +3/+2 is not bad. That's a pretty good buff to your creature. I think it reminds me the most of the old Sword of X and Y cycle, Sword of Fire and Ice, Sword of Light and Shadow, Sword of War and Peace. You lose the protection, which is a pretty big deal, but you get a slightly better buff, and then you also get 2 really powerful abilities, like getting in a hit to draw a card is like Sword of Fire and Ice, and then casting something for free from your hand is a really high upside ability. Like, if you get in a hit with this and drop like a 5-drop or a 6-drop, you're gonna pull super far ahead super quickly. But it's honestly these swords that make me skeptical that Buster Sword can see play in Standard, or at least like high-end competitive play. We can definitely build a fun deck around it in Standard, but as far as being like a competitive card, I'm honestly not sure. If you drop Sword of Fire and Ice or Sword of Light and Shadow, some of the all-time best traditional equipment into Standard, if they would see any play, because the problem isn't the effect on these cards. The effect's really good. It's that Standard is so powerful and so fast, it's really hard to play a card that you gotta spend 3 to get on the battlefield, then 2 more to put onto a creature, and then get in an attack with that creature, while still being able to stay in the game against the Mice decks and the Prowess decks. And then if you're running a removal heavy deck, your opponent's just gonna let you cast it, and then go to equip it, and then kill your creature in response, and it's a huge tempo loss. So I think Buster Sword is good. It's more that just cards like this don't really line up with what modern Standard is about. I do love how Buster Sword works really well with basically every Cloud printed in the Final Fantasy set. Cloud from the Standard set, imagine using Cloud to tutor up Buster Sword, putting Buster Sword on Cloud, somehow getting in with an attack, and double triggering it to draw 2 cards and play 2 things for free. Like, if you can pull that off, you probably just win the game. How easy it'll be to pull that off, that's another story. But if you can actually do it, it is a huge amount of value. Cloud Planets Champion from the starter kits, you can equip Buster Sword for free thanks to its cost reduction. Commander Cloud, Cloud X Soldier, lets you equip things for free, so it's another way you can get Buster Sword, and it's going to get the power of Cloud up to 7 if you put Buster Sword on it to trigger all of its abilities. So I think that they designed this card almost specifically to work with the Clouds from the set, which makes a lot of sense. As far as Standard is concerned, if you look at the equipment that actually see play in the last like few years of Standard, there's really hardly any, and the ones that do see play because they make creatures. Corey Steelcutter, yes, it's technically an equipment, but really its power is making a bunch of tokens, giving them haste, buffing them. Cryptic Coat also saw a bit of play, but that also manifests a creature and it's repeatable, so it's making a bunch of bodies. So I'm just skeptical of equipment that don't make bodies, they don't equip for free, even if they're powerful like the Buster Sword. I mean, we have Sword of Forge and Frontier, Sword of Once and Future in Standard right now. and no one actually plays them, which makes me scared about Buster Sword. As I mentioned before, the biggest concern of this is, outside of being slow, also just your stuff dying to removal in response. Even if you pull off the Buster Sword and go to put it on Cloud, it can get cut down, or it can get Burst Lightning. Even if you get the Buster Sword on your Cloud, something like a Monastery Swift Spear can jump it, because there's not any evasion. On the other hand, once you get back to older formats, there are some sweet synergies for this card. Pretty cute with Fervent Champion, since it reduces the cost of equipping things to it down to 3, so you get to equip Buster Sword for free, which means you can do some pretty busted starts where you like Fervent Champion, Leyline Axe for free as a Leyline, equip that for double strike, Buster Sword, equip it so you have this huge buff, get in with the Fervent Champion, double draw, double play things for free. So I could see trying it in older formats. Also in older formats, you get Stoneforge to sneak it into play, so it is a really high ceiling card when it works. The question is going to be, how often can it work? On the other hand, this card seems absolutely great in Commander. I think you'll play it in any Cloud deck for the reasons that we talked about before, but really, any sort of Voltron deck, it's hilarious with Slicer or Alexios, the commanders that pass around the table, because if you read Buster Sword closely, whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you draw the card, you get to cast the thing for free. So if you put a Buster Sword on a Slicer, and it's going around the table and hitting everyone, and Slicer already has double strike, you could theoretically be drawing like 8 cards each turn cycle and casting 8 things for free from your hand, which is kind of insane. It also just seems good in any equipment deck. Nahiri, Sir Gwyn, Captain America. If you're playing an equipment deck in Commander, I think I'm playing this pretty much all the time. In Commander, unlike 1v1 formats, you don't have to deal with as much cheap removal to blow you out in response to equipping, and you have 3 opponents, so even though Buster Sword doesn't give evasion, you can always just attack the player that doesn't really have their defenses set up. So I think it's a really good Commander card. In Standard, I'm definitely going to try to build around it, because it seems like a really fun deck to build, but I would honestly be surprised if there was like a top tier Buster Sword deck in Standard. We also got a new Mythic Red Sweeper in Nibelheim Aflame. So it's 4 mana for a sorcery. It says choose target creature you control. It deals damage equal to its power to each other creature, and then it has flashback of 7, and if you cast it from your graveyard, you get to discard your hand and draw 4 cards. So Nibelheim Aflame, very similar to Waltz of Rage, which we currently have in Standard, kind of does the same thing. You don't get flashback, it is 1 more mana, so I think Nibelheim Aflame is an upgraded version of Waltz of Rage, which is good, because Waltz of Rage doesn't really see any play. I've also seen the comparison to Chandra's Ignition, but I will say, I think that's a pretty bad comparison, because Chandra's Ignition, even though it kind of does the same thing of choosing one of your creatures, dealing damage to everything, the big difference here is Chandra's Ignition also hits your opponent's face. So most of the time when I see people play Chandra's Ignition in a Commander deck, they're using it to try to kill their opponents, not to kill their opponent's board. So I think that Nibelheim Aflame isn't exactly the same as Chandra's Ignition, more like a Waltz of Rage. In Standard, I don't think you play this card. I mean, we have Waltz of Rage in Standard. No one really plays it. The issue is you can get blown out in response to it very easily. Like, let's say you build a big creature, you Nibelheim Aflame to try to wrath the board. If your opponent goes for the throat that creature, get lost that creature, this down ain't big enough, whatever removal spell on that creature, it fizzles the entire effect and you lose your big creature. So cards like this just generally don't see Standard play. As far as Commander is concerned, I don't think this card's really a staple that you just play in any deck. However, there are decks that are really going to like it. It's really good in Voltron decks. If you're building a big commander and protecting that commander, this is a pretty efficient sweeper with flashback, so you can sweep twice and maybe draw some cards eventually. It works well with excess damage commanders like Miraca, because you're dealing damage to everything. The other cool trick with this card is using it with lifelink or with death touch. So since the creature you choose deals damage, let's say you're playing commander, you get a shadow sphere on your creature, so it has lifelink, and then you Nibelheim Aflame it, you're going to gain an absurd amount of life. Your creature is going to deal a little damage to all the other creatures. All that damage is going to have lifelink. On a big board, you're probably gaining like 50 life or something insane. It's also really cute with Death Touch. With Death Touch, like on Queen Marchesa, you cast this, since Queen Marchesa has Death Touch, even though it's only dealing 3 damage to everything, that damage is going to be guaranteed to kill all of the creatures on the battlefield. So I think that this is a card that, in the right deck, can be really powerful. Being able to flash it back is a nice upside. The card advantage is a nice upside. But you really need to be some sort of Voltron deck, or a deck that's really built around protecting and building a big creature, or that has other synergies for this deck, to really want to play this card. You can't just jam it in any deck and get value out of it. We also got a new white mythic, and this one I think might actually be very very good in Standard in Summon Knights of the Round. So Summon Knights of the Round, it's a Saga creature. It's 8 mana for a 3/3 indestructible Saga Knight. It has 5 abilities. The first 4 lower counters create 3 2/2 White Knight creature tokens. So you play this, you get a 3/3 and 3 2/2s. The next turn, 3 more 2/2s. The next turn, 3 more 2/2s. The next turn, 3 more 2/2s. And then if you actually get to the ultimate end, it gives your other creatures +2/+2, and you get an indestructible counter on each of them, which means they're not only indestructible for the turn, they're indestructible literally forever. So obviously, Summon Knights of the Round, it's a lot of mana. 8 mana is a lot, but if you think about the amount of power this adds to the battlefield, it's actually kind of absurd. Over the course of those first 4 turns, you're going to make 12 2/2 Knights. That's 24 power and toughness across 12 bodies, plus you have Summon in the Knights of the Round itself, and then that last turn you probably just win the game if your board's still around. So comparisons for this card, there actually isn't really a great comparison, although I will say, considering a card like Imperial Oath, which was just a common, but it's 6 mana to make 3 2/2s, spending 8 mana to make 3 2/2s 4 times and getting indestructible 3/3 actually seems like a pretty good deal. And then you kind of get this, there's not actually a card in Magic that just puts an indestructible counter on your entire team, at least one that I could find, but it's kind of like an unbreakable formation, but it's permanent rather than just doing it for a turn. So this card also reminds me a little bit of History of Benalia. This is like History of Benalia, like 4 of them stapled together. And History of Benalia was really good not that long ago in Standard, but it kind of works the same way, where you make a bunch of tokens, pump your team. This is just a very expensive version of it. The thing I love about this card, and this is going to become even more true after rotation once Sunfall goes away this summer, but it's really good against sweepers. It's bad against Sunfall in specific, since Sunfall just exiles your Summon Knights of the Round and all the tokens, but once that's gone, we're going to have Day of Judgments, we're going to have Ultimas, Temporary Lockdown currently exists, that's going to be leaving. But let's say you play Summon Knights of the Round, you get your 3/3, you get 3 2/2s, and your opponent Day of Judgments, you're like, okay, whatever, my Summon Knights of the Round is still indestructible. Next turn, I'll make 3 more 2/2s. Your opponent's going to need a Wrath like 5 turns in a row, which doesn't really seem possible to beat this card. So if you can get this on the battlefield early enough in the game, which is the challenge since it's 8 mana, it is going to win you the game eventually. I think probably the most realistic plan for getting this into play is not just going to be casting it for 8 mana. That's a lot of mana, but we have several cards in Standard that can get this into play way quicker. We have a Waylo's Awakening, which we often see reanimating Omniscience. This can get Summon Knights of the Round for just 4 mana. We got Yuna coming from the Final Fantasy set that can reanimate enchantments. We have cards like Zombify that just reanimate a creature. This is also a creature. So this could be a really good reanimation style card. I could also see it being a ramp card. I don't know if it'll fit in like the Overlord of the Hauntwoods Lumbering Worldwagon decks. Right now we have Leyline Binding, so there is a reason to be white in these decks. And like I said, this is really resilient to sweepers, so I could see some of the ramp decks playing a couple copies of this card. It's not going to generate like a new hand like Atraxa does, but the Knights that it makes are worth a lot of card advantage over the course of a few turns. It also seems really good with some of the new Terras that we got in the set, especially in Commander. This is going to work really well with enchantment themed decks, Knight themed decks, and Saga themed decks in specific. But for example, Terra Herald of Hope, the Commander Precon Terra, cares about creatures with power 3 or less. You get to reanimate it for 2 mana once you deal combat damage. It turns out this is just a 3/3, so it actually works incredibly well there. Terra Magical Adept, able to copy non-legendary enchantments. So imagine getting down Summon Knights of the Round and you get a bunch of lower counters on your sagas. You're going to make so many Knights so quickly if you get this going in a Terra deck. Also, there's a bunch of other Saga themed decks in Commander. Ivor, Tom Bombadil, Narcy, any of these decks, this is going to be one of the best sagas in your deck. It's just such a great finishing saga. The other place it seems good is in Knight deck. So you can play it in any Knight deck. It's going to be worse in like an Edaline Knight deck because those decks, you're probably just going to have to cast it for 8 mana. But if you're playing like Sidar Jabari, really good at reanimating Knights from your graveyard, and it even lets you discard Knights. So in Sidar Jabari, you just discard this Sidar Jabari's ability, get it back, start making your Knights take over the game. So I think Summon Knights of the Round, one of the strongest cards from the set, which it should be considering it's 8 mana, so you can't just play it in any deck. And that's kind of the weird aspect of this card. Like, it kind of reads like an aggro card, but it's also 8 mana, so your regular decks can't really play it. But this is a great reanimation target, like a game-ending reanimation target. Plus, we get a lot of cool synergies for it with the Saga stuff and the enchantment stuff. So I absolutely love this card. One of my favorite cards from the set, and I think this one might be very good, not just in Commander, but also in Standard. We also got a new Chocobo Tutor in Sazh Katzroy. So it's a 4-mana 3/3 legendary human pilot. When it enters, you can search your library for a bird or a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle. And then when it attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and then double the number of counters on that creature. So this seems like a card that is designed to work in the Chocobo deck. This is a way we can find Chococo, we can find Traveling Chocobo, we can find Sazh Chocobo, and it works really well with the theme of the deck, because if you need a Chocobo, you can tutor up the bird, but all the Chocobos care about lands in some way. So if you already have the Chocobos you need, you just get a land, make your land drop, trigger all your landfall stuff. So it seems really powerful there. And then even its second ability of putting counters on things kind of works with like the landfall theme of Sazh Chocobo, so it could be fine there as well. The other place this card is kind of interesting is in some sort of straight up landfall +1/+1 counter deck. In standard right now, we have Bristly Bill that puts counters on things, double counters. We have Mossborn Hydra, which doubles counters with landfall. Ornery Tumblewake, another way to double up counters. In a deck like this, the second ability of putting counters on things seems like it could be really strong. And then we can still play like Traveling Chocobo to double trigger all of our landfall stuff, so we still have a non-land tutor target. So curious to see if maybe we can make a mono green +1/+1 counter landfall deck out of this card. In Commander, outside of being good in bird decks, obviously. So if you're playing birds, you're probably going to play this card in the 99. Not the most exciting commander, I don't think, because in my bird deck, I really want to be multicolor, not just mono green. But you could also just play it in a +1/+1 counter deck. Shalai Nalar, Hamza, just as another way to double up your counters, power up your commander. So Sazh Katzroy, this seems fine. Good for bird decks, nice synergy. At 4 mana, I don't think it's like a staple level card, but it does replace itself and certainly could have a role in some sort of bird or landfall based +1/+1 counter deck in standard. We also got a new legendary payoff in Serah Farron. So the front side of this card, 3 mana Selesnya 2/2. It's a human citizen. It says the first legendary creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 less to cast, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 2 or more other legendary creatures, you can flip it around into Crystallized Serah, which is a legendary artifact. This still lets you cast your first legendary creature for 2 less mana each turn, and it gives legendary creatures you control +2/+2. So let's start with the bad news with this card. In standard, it kind of dies to everything. Cut down, burst lightning, torch the tower. So I don't think this is going to be that good in standard, just because it's a 3-drop that dies to all the most common and cheapest removal spells. On the other hand, if you build around this, it can be pretty explosive. I imagine maybe the best way to play this card, in standard in specific, is not to play it on turn 3, but play it on turn 4 and immediately follow it up with another creature. So if you can play on turn 4, Serah, you can follow it up with like Anafenza for 1 mana, Delny for 1 mana, Fortune for 1 mana, Lorna the Third Path for 1 mana, and if you played any legend earlier in the game, then you just go to combat, you flip around. Once you flip around, you avoid the downside of dying to cut downs and burst lightnings, and then giving all your legends +2/+2 is going to make your board really scary really fast. It's a Day of Destiny that can come down way faster, and it gives you some ramping as well. So flipping this card does seem really powerful if you can get it to stick. The other worry I have for standard is because of Corey Steelcutter, people are kind of prepared for artifacts right now. So once you flip it around, there's still a risk it gets abraded or something, but maybe you can just get in so much damage from the +2/+2 that it's not even going to matter if it dies. The other place this card could be interesting is there's been some modern decks I've messed around with that are kind of straight up legendary decks, trying to use Mox Amber with Kytheons and Ragavans and Marys to just flood the board with legends really, really quickly. In a deck like that, I think I'd at least consider playing a copy or 2 of Serah, mostly for the backside, where I can play this. I'm already hopefully going to have enough legends on the battlefield that I can flip it the first turn, and a 3 mana version of Day of Destinies actually seems like a great way to close out a game in a deck like that. In Commander, you can't just play this as your commander and have be like a Selesnya Legends Matter commander, although honestly, I think it's probably going to be at the best in the 99 of some other really powerful Legends Matters decks, like perfect for Joda, perfect for Azeka, Sisay Weatherlight Captain, any of those decks. I think you can play this as a combination like ramp spell and finisher, and in Commander, you don't got to worry as much about the cheap removal blowing you out, so actually flipping into Crystallized Serah actually seems relatively practical. So Serah, I think the card's fine in some sort of Legends deck. We'll see what it does in Standard. We don't really have an archetype for it in Standard, and it does die to a lot of the popular removal, but in a Legendary Matters Commander deck, actually seems like a pretty good ramp spell / payoff. We also got a bunch more of the Final Fantasy Through the Ages card. Again, not a ton of like super expensive stuff. I think the most expensive card, probably the Nagila, is Crowd Strife, around $8 or $10, but some really cool art, some sweet treatments that you can get just for opening booster packs. I love these special seeds, some of my favorite parts of sets, and this one is no exception. We also got a card that I kind of hate. And I know I'm going to get yelled at for this take because some people feel very differently, but that is Instant Ramen. Yes, we have a magic card now that is Instant Ramen. It's a 2-mana food artifact. It has flash because it's Instant Ramen. And when it enters, you get to draw a card, and then you pay 2 and sacrifice it to gain 3 life. So Instant Ramen, not a hugely impactful card. It could see some Pauper play. We've seen similar artifacts see play in Pauper in the past, so it could see play there. Unlikely to be a standard staple. I gotta say, cards like this, though, I just really don't like them. They're so, like, modern and realistic. It's like something you could get from your grocery store. I'm not a big stickler about high fantasy or any of that. I don't really care about that stuff, but kind of like the Doctor Who cards, where some of them are like, here's a British guy eating a sandwich in his garage. Cards like that just rub me the wrong way for some reason, but I'm curious what you all think about Instant Ramen. I will say, I did a little research on this card, because I was curious why Instant Ramen was even in Final Fantasy, and it turns out, and this is my understanding as a non-Final Fantasy player, that it was a product placement mini game that was actually like a branded cup of noodles, and they were trying to like sell you these noodles in a mini game in Final Fantasy 15. It seemed like it was pretty controversial when it first released, and a lot of people thought it was pretty cringy, but then eventually it kind of turned into being a meme, and people are kind of okay with it now. As far as Magic's concerned, it's kind of like Lambas. I think Lambas probably just better in most decks that would want it. You do get the upside of scrying 1. You get Flash on Instant Ramen, but very similar cards. You could play both of them in the deck if you want to do a Universes Beyond food deck. But let me know what you think about Instant Ramen. Personally, I kind of find it cringe, but I guess maybe that's how you're supposed to feel, because apparently the Final Fantasy community, at least initially, found it cringe when it showed up in Final Fantasy 15 as well. We also got a couple of Draft Chaff cards you can check out over on MTGPreviews.com. Summon Anima actually is kind of a sweet card. You end up drawing 3 and losing 3 over the course of a few turns, and then making your opponent sack something. It is just a little expensive for standard. 6 mana for a 4/4, just a bit too much. And then Reno in Rude, a 2-mana 2/1 legendary human assassin. It is Menace. When it deals combat damage to a player, you exile the top card of that player's library. You may sack another creature artifact. If you do, you can play the exiled card this turn and spend mana of any type to cast it. So fine for some sort of like assassin decking commander. Probably not gonna make it in standard, but actually it's not that far away. The Menace is a nice little bonus. Anyway, that's been our daily Final Fantasy spoilers for today. So what do you think of all these sweet new mythics? What do you think of Buster Sword? What about the Knight Saga? How good is that card gonna be? What about Instant Ramen? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you all enjoy it. And I'll be back tomorrow, or maybe Monday, depending on how many spoilers we get, with even more Final Fantasy spoilers. So until then, have an amazing day, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? We can find yesterday's spoiler video here, or maybe our Mucha Brew, where we tried to combo off with Guardian Sunmare and Roaming Throne in standard.